February 19, 1943. Kasserine Pass, Tunisia. German Panzer Grenadiers of the 10th Panzer Division watched American forces retreat in disorder. Tanks abandoned. Equipment scattered. Prisoners streaming back in confusion. Obergefreiter Hans Schmidt wrote in his diary that night, "The Americans run at the first sign of serious resistance. They rely on equipment because they lack fighting spirit. Their officers cannot control their men. They are not soldiers. They are civilians in uniform who want to go home." This assessment, Americans were soft, poorly led, and would break under pressure, became conventional wisdom in the Wehrmacht. German commanders planning the defense of France in 1944 built their strategies partly around this assumption. They were catastrophically wrong. June 6, 1944. Omaha Beach, Normandy. Obergefreiter Franz Gockel crouched in Widerstands Nest 62, Resistance Nest 62, a fortified position overlooking Omaha Beach. At 6:30 a.m., the bombardment lifted, and Gockel looked down at the beach. What he saw contradicted everything he'd been told about Americans. Soldiers advancing through withering fire, men hit, knocked down, getting up, continuing forward, medics treating wounded under direct fire, engineers blowing obstacles while machine guns cut through their ranks, officers leading from the front, dying with their men. Americans weren't running. They were attacking directly into the strongest German defenses in France, and they weren't stopping. By nightfall, Gockel was a prisoner. The soft Americans had taken his position through sheer determination and casualties that shocked German defenders who'd expected them to break. Between Kasserine Pass and Omaha Beach, something fundamental had changed. The American army that entered Normandy in June 1944 bore little resemblance to the green force that had been mauled in Tunisia 16 months earlier. This is the story of that transformation. How German assumptions about American soldiers, formed at Kasserine, reinforced by propaganda, collided with reality in Normandy. How American determination, adaptability, and firepower shattered Wehrmacht confidence, and how the German army's underestimation of American fighting spirit contributed to their catastrophic defeat in France. From the blood-soaked sands of Omaha Beach to the apocalyptic Falaise pocket, German soldiers discovered they'd been lied to about their enemy. The Americans weren't soft, they were lethal. Kasserine Pass, where German assumptions began. To understand what Germans believed about Americans in 1944, you need to understand Kasserine Pass in 1943. February 14th to 25th, 1943. The battle. American forces, primarily from the 1st Armored Division and 34th Infantry Division, had been in combat in North Africa for only weeks. They faced German and Italian forces under Field Marshal Erwin Rommel. The American problems. Green troops with no combat experience. Poor coordination between units. Inadequate reconnaissance. Commanders who didn't understand German tactics. Equipment problems. Early model Shermans. Inferior tactics. Confusion in command structure. The German attack. German forces, veteran of 2 years of desert warfare, struck American positions. The result was catastrophic. American defensive positions collapsed. Units retreated in disorder. Equipment was abandoned. Over 6,000 American casualties. killed, wounded, captured. German forces captured mountains of American supplies. German assessment. German commanders and soldiers drew conclusions from Rommel's observations. American troops lacked aggression. American officers were hesitant and overcautious. Americans relied on material superiority rather than tactical skill. American units couldn't withstand determined attack. From soldier accounts, Americans would retreat rather than fight when pressed. American morale was fragile. American gangsters and cowboys made poor soldiers. American democratic culture produced undisciplined troops. These assessments were partly correct for February 1943. Green American troops with inadequate training and inexperienced leadership had performed poorly against veteran German forces. But German commanders made a critical error. They assumed this represented permanent American characteristics rather than inexperience that could be corrected. The transformation, 16 months of learning. Between Kasserine Pass, February 1943, and D-Day, June 1944, the American Army underwent dramatic transformation. The leadership changes. After Kasserine, General Eisenhower made immediate changes. Lloyd Fredendall, 2nd Corps commander, relieved and replaced by George Patton. Result: Patton implemented ruthless discipline, intensive training, and aggressive tactics. Within weeks, 2nd Corps was a different force. The tactical lessons: American forces in North Africa, then Sicily, then Italy, learned through combat how to coordinate armor and infantry, how to use artillery effectively, how to conduct reconnaissance, how to read German tactics and counter them, how to lead under fire. The training revolution. Back in the United States and Britain, training intensified based on North Africa lessons, realistic combat scenarios, combined arms exercises, leadership under stress, physical conditioning that simulated combat demands, the equipment improvements. By mid-1944, later model Sherman tanks with better armor and guns, improved anti-tank weapons, better artillery coordination systems, enhanced communications equipment, the experience accumulation. By D-Day, many American units and leaders had significant combat experience. North Africa veterans, Sicily veterans, Italy veterans, commanders who'd learned from failures. The force landing in Normandy was fundamentally different from the force mauled at Kasserine Pass. German intelligence noted some of these changes, but failed to grasp the magnitude of transformation. June 6, 1944. Omaha Beach. The first shock. German soldiers defending Normandy beaches expected Americans to break under fire. Omaha Beach shattered that assumption. The German defensive position. Omaha Beach was defended by 352nd Infantry Division, recently moved into position. Fortified positions, wider stands nests, on bluffs overlooking beach. Extensive obstacles and mines. Overlapping fields of fire. Artillery positioned to destroy landing craft. The Germans at Omaha had been told Americans would break when facing serious resistance. The landing, 6:30 a.m. First wave hit the beach. The situation was immediately catastrophic. Landing craft dropped ramps too far from shore. Men drowned under equipment weight. German fire from bluffs was devastating. Machine guns, mortars, artillery. Beach obstacles destroyed landing craft. Many casualties before reaching dry sand. Units landed in wrong locations, command structure confused. By any reasonable assessment, the landing was failing. Casualties were enormous. Units were pinned down. Advance had stopped. This was when Germans expected Americans to break, to retreat to landing craft, to surrender, to stop attacking. What actually happened? Americans kept coming, kept attacking, kept advancing. Obergefreiter Franz Gockel, WN662. Later interrogation testimony, National Archives. We shot and shot. The Americans fell. More came. We shot them. More came. They did not stop. They did not run away. They came up the beach directly into our fire. I could not understand it. We were told Americans would not attack into strong positions, but they came anyway. Some fell and did not move. Others were hit, and I got up and continued forward. We killed many, but they kept coming. Eventually, they reached the bluffs below us. We could not fire down at that angle. Then they were coming up the bluff. Then they were at our position. I realized we were the ones who should be afraid, not them. The casualty price. Omaha Beach cost approximately 2,400 American casualties, the highest casualties of any D-Day beach. But Americans took the beach. By evening, they'd penetrated inland. The soft Americans had attacked directly into the strongest German defenses and succeeded through sheer determination. The German reaction. German commanders at higher headquarters initially didn't believe the reports. Americans attacking into direct fire, taking massive casualties, and continuing? This contradicted everything they'd been told. Frontline soldiers knew differently. They'd seen it. The bocage. Americans adapt. After the initial landings, fighting moved into the Normandy bocage, hedgerow country that favored defenders. The terrain. Normandy's bocage consisted of small fields, 1 to 3 acres, surrounded by ancient hedgerows. Hedgerows. Earth banks 3 to 6 feet high, topped with thick vegetation. Each field a separate fortress. Limited visibility. Perfect defensive terrain. The German expectation. German commanders believed the bocage would stop American advances. Tanks couldn't push through the hedgerows. Infantry advancing between hedgerows would be slaughtered. American reliance on mobility and firepower would be negated. The advance would bog down in attritional fighting. Initially, they were right. American progress through the bocage was slow, costly, and grinding. The American problem? Sherman tanks climbing over hedgerows, exposed thin belly armor, gun pointed uselessly at sky. Perfect target for German anti-tank weapons. Tank after tank was destroyed this way. The American solution? Sergeant Curtis Cullen's innovation. Note: this was covered in detail in a previous documentary script. Summary here for continuity. Sergeant Curtis Cullen, 102nd Cavalry Reconnaissance Squadron, developed a solution. Weld steel teeth to the front of Sherman tanks. The teeth cut through hedgerows at ground level instead of climbing over. Tanks could breach hedgerows quickly without exposing vulnerable belly armor. The steel source, German beach obstacles, the steel barriers Rommel had planted on beaches, were cut up and welded to tanks. Enemy steel used to break enemy defenses. The implementation. Within weeks, hundreds of Sherman tanks were equipped with hedgerow cutters. The innovation spread throughout American armored units. The German reaction. German defenders had based tactics around Americans' inability to breach hedgerows quickly. The Kulin cutter negated that advantage. General Fritz Bayerlein, Panzerlehr Division commander, later testimony. The Americans showed adaptability we had not expected. When their tanks were vulnerable climbing hedgerows, they modified the tanks. When their tactics didn't work, they changed tactics. This was not the rigid equipment-dependent force we had been told about. This was an army that learned and adapted faster than we could respond. Operation Cobra, overwhelming firepower. July 25, 1944. The American breakout from Normandy. The plan. General Omar Bradley planned a concentrated attack to smash through German lines south of St. Lo. Massive aerial bombardment to shatter German defenses. Concentrated armor exploitation through the gap. Rapid advance before Germans could react. The bombardment. July 24th to 25th. Over 2,400 Allied aircraft dropped approximately 4,000 tons of bombs on a 7,000-yard by 2,500-yard target area. General Fritz Bayerlein, Panzerlehr Division defending the target area. Post-war testimony. The bombing was apocalyptic. I had never experienced anything like it. My entire division, one of the elite Panzer divisions of the Wehrmacht, simply ceased to exist as an organized force. Tanks were blown apart. Infantry positions disappeared. Communications were destroyed. Command structure collapsed. Within 2 hours, my division was combat ineffective. When American armor attacked, there was little organized resistance. Not because my soldiers lacked courage, but because there were no soldiers left to resist. They were dead, wounded, or in shock. This was not tactical superiority in the traditional sense. This was material overwhelming force, but the effect was the same. My division was destroyed. The aftermath. American armor, particularly Patton's Third Army, poured through the gap. The static battle in Normandy became mobile warfare. German forces that had been containing the Americans for weeks suddenly faced operational collapse. The pursuit, Patton unleashed. August 1944. American armor racing across France. The German expectation. Even after Cobra, German commanders expected Americans to advance cautiously, consolidate gains, establish supply lines, advance methodically. This was how the British advanced. This was how prudent commanders operated. What Patton did. Third Army advanced at speeds that shocked everyone, including American high command. Bypassed German strongpoints. Advanced faster than supply lines could follow. Some units ran out of fuel and waited for supplies to catch up. Covered 400-plus miles in weeks. The German reaction. General Gunther Blumentritt, Chief of Staff, O.B. West. Post-war account. Patton's advance was comparable to our own blitzkrieg operations in 1940. He understood mobile warfare in the way our panzer generals did. He accepted risk that other Allied commanders would not. When we attempted to establish defensive lines, Patton's forces reached them before we did. When we attempted counterattacks, Patton had already moved past the point we were attacking toward. This was not the cautious, methodical American army we expected. This was German-style warfare, executed by Americans with unlimited fuel and supplies. The Falaise Pocket Apocalypse, August 12 through 21, 1944. The destruction of German forces in Normandy. The situation. Hitler ordered German forces to counterattack at Mortain rather than retreat. The counterattack failed. This left German forces in a pocket between advancing American forces from the south and west and Canadian/British forces from the north. The trap. The Falaise Pocket, named after the town of Falaise, became a killing zone. German forces trapped in approximately 20-mile-wide corridor. Allied artillery, air power and armor attacking from multiple directions. Only narrow escape route through Falaise Gap. Retreat became rout. General Fritz Bayerlein attempting to escape with Panzerlehr remnants. Account. The roads were choked with destroyed vehicles, dead horses, burning equipment. Allied aircraft attacked anything that moved. Artillery fire was constant. Units that entered the pocket as organized divisions left as scattered groups of survivors. My Panzerlehr division, which had been elite formation, was destroyed. Not defeated in battle, destroyed, annihilated. The Americans and British did not just defeat us. They obliterated entire German armies. The force we'd brought to Normandy ceased to exist. The statistics. German casualties in the Falaise Pocket. Approximately 50,000 captured. 10,000 to 15,000 killed. Enormous equipment losses. Tanks, vehicles, artillery. The German army in the West was effectively destroyed as a coherent fighting force. German soldier accounts. The perspective from the ranks. Beyond general officers, German soldiers at all levels recorded their changing views of American forces. From confidence to concern. Early Normandy, June 1944. Grenadier accounts. The Americans have equipment, but lack skill. We can defeat them in close combat where equipment matters less. Mid-Normandy, July 1944. The Americans learn quickly. They coordinate their attacks better than they did weeks ago. Their artillery is devastating, more than we have ever faced. After Cobra, late July. We cannot stop them. They have unlimited artillery, unlimited air support. When we destroy one tank, 3 more appear. Our positions are bombed, then attacked, then overrun. We cannot hold. August 1944. The Americans are not the soldiers we were told about. They fight hard. They attack aggressively. They do not quit. We were lied to. The statistical evidence. Combat effectiveness measured. Beyond testimony, statistical evidence shows American improvement. Kasserine Pass, February 1943. American forces defeated comprehensively. Lost ground, equipment, prisoners, poor kill-to-loss ratios. Tunisia, April to May 1943. American forces improving. Better coordination. Contributing effectively to final victory. Sicily, July to August 1943. American forces competitive with German forces. Patton's 7th Army's advance comparable to Montgomery's 8th Army. Normandy, June to August 1944. American forces overwhelming German forces through combination of improved tactics, better leadership, massive material superiority, effective combined arms coordination. the German kill-to-loss ratio declined. In North Africa, German forces achieved favorable kill-to-loss ratios against Americans. By Normandy, this had reversed. Americans were inflicting disproportionate casualties through superior artillery, overwhelming air power, better logistics allowing sustained operations, improved tactical competence. Why German assumptions failed. German commanders and soldiers made several critical errors assessing Americans. Error 1. Assumed inexperience was permanent. Kasserine showed inexperienced American forces. Germans assumed this reflected permanent American characteristics rather than correctable inexperience. Americans learned rapidly. Error 2. Mistook material focus for tactical incompetence. Americans did rely heavily on artillery, air support, and material superiority. Germans interpreted this as inability to fight without material advantages. But Americans combined material superiority with improving tactical skills, a devastating combination. Error 3. Confused democratic culture with military weakness. German Nazi ideology suggested democratic, individualistic American culture would produce undisciplined soldiers. In reality, American democratic culture produced soldiers who showed initiative, adapted quickly, and continued fighting, even when command structure broke down. Error 4. Underestimated American adaptability. The Cullen Hedgerow cutter exemplified American problem solving. Germans expected rigid adherence to doctrine. Americans innovated in the field. Error 5. Failed to account for learning curve. Germans compared their battle-hardened Wehrmacht to green American forces and assumed superiority would persist. They failed to account for American forces gaining experience while German experienced soldiers were being killed and replaced with increasingly green replacements. By late 1944, many German units were less experienced than American units they faced. The German perspective. Post-war assessments. After the war, German generals provided detailed assessments of American forces. Field Marshal Gerd von Rundstedt. The Americans were not the best soldiers. That distinction belonged to the Russians, who had fanatical determination, or to our own Wehrmacht at its peak. But the Americans were the most complete military force. They had adequate soldiers who, with experience, became good soldiers. They had competent commanders who learned quickly, and they had overwhelming material superiority that they used intelligently. The combination was irresistible, not through any single superiority, but through the combination of adequate to good soldiers with overwhelming firepower, logistics, and air support. General Siegfried Westphal. We underestimated the Americans. We saw their reliance on material and assumed they could not fight without it, but they fought very effectively with it, and they learned to fight well even when material advantages were temporarily negated. By late 1944, American infantry was as effective as ours. American armor was tactically comparable, and American artillery and air support were incomparably superior. General Fritz Bayerlein. The Americans we faced in Normandy bore no resemblance to the Americans at Kasserine Pass. In 16 months, they had transformed themselves into a formidable force. Their greatest strength was adaptability. When tactics didn't work, they changed tactics. When equipment was inadequate, they modified equipment. When commanders failed, they replaced commanders. We could not match this organizational learning speed. By the time we understood American tactics and developed counters, Americans had already evolved to new approaches. The critical factors. Why Americans succeeded? The American transformation from Kasserine to Normandy reflected several factors. Factor 1. Institutional learning. The U.S. Army systematically analyzed failures, disseminated lessons, and implemented changes. This organizational learning was faster and more effective than German learning during the same period. Factor 2. Leadership selection. Poor commanders were relieved. Effective commanders were promoted. By Normandy, American forces had leadership that had proven itself in combat. Factor 3. Material abundance. American industrial capacity meant losses could be replaced quickly. Ammunition was never rationed, unlike German forces. Air superiority was overwhelming. Logistics supported sustained operations. Factor 4. Training improvements. Training incorporated combat lessons continuously. Units arriving in Normandy were better prepared than units that had fought in North Africa. Factor 5. Experience accumulation. By D-Day, many American units and commanders had significant combat experience. The green force of Kasserine was now veteran. Conclusion. The assumption that cost an army. February 1943. Kasserine Pass. Germans defeated Americans and concluded Americans were soft. June 1944. Omaha Beach. Americans attacked directly into German defensive fire and took the beach through the determination that shocked defenders. July to August 1944. Operation Cobra. And the pursuit. Americans executed mobile warfare that reminded German generals of their own blitzkrieg, but with unlimited resources. August 1944. Falaise Pocket. The German army in the West was destroyed. In 16 months, Americans transformed from the force that broke at Kasserine to the force that annihilated German armies in Normandy. German soldiers and commanders who'd assumed American softness was permanent discovered their fatal error. Americans weren't inherently soft. They were inexperienced. Experience can be gained. Americans weren't inherently poor soldiers. They were poorly trained and led initially. Training and leadership improved. Americans' reliance on material wasn't weakness. It was intelligent use of industrial advantage. Combined with improving tactical skill, it was devastating. Franz Gockel, the German soldier who defended WN 62 at Omaha Beach, survived as a POW. In a 1980s interview, he reflected, "We were told the Americans would run. They did not run. They came directly at us, and they did not stop. I learned that day that we had been lied to. About Americans. About the war. About our chances of winning. The Americans were not soft. They were determined. And they had unlimited shells for their artillery and unlimited bullets for their machine guns and unlimited tanks to replace destroyed ones. How could we win against that? We could not. We learned this in Normandy, but it was too late. The German assumption that Americans were soft, formed at Kasserine Pass, was shattered on the beaches of Normandy and destroyed completely in the Bocage and at Falaise. By the time German commanders realized their error, their armies were already destroyed. Sometimes the most dangerous assumption is the one that's initially correct but becomes wrong. Kasserine Pass Germans were right about American inexperience. Normandy Germans discovered that inexperience had been replaced by experience, determination, and overwhelming force. The transformation shocked the Wehrmacht, but by then it was too late to matter.